Welcome back to the Working Well podcast, where we explore how human performance, business strategy, and leadership can be harnessed to help people and organizations thrive. Today's conversation is about a critical and often overlooked leadership truth that healthy, engaged, and productive teams don't happen by accident. They happen by design. Now, I'm joined by Mark Reich. He's a senior coach and chief engineer of strategy at Lean Enterprise Institute. He's also a former Toyota executive. Together, we're going to unpack how Lean principles and Hoshin Kanri, the legendary strategy deployment process behind Toyota's success, can help leaders align on purpose, people, and performance in very powerful ways. If you want to build an environment where employees are energized, connected to your mission, and able to do their best work without burning out, this episode is for you. Mark, so great to have you on the show today, and I'm excited to dive into this topic. Before we get started, tell us just a quick little intro of how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Tim. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So I prompted this podcast by I've recently published a book, and how did I get there? It's kind of a long journey. But maybe briefly to explain, I spent 23 years with Toyota. I ended up in Japan in the 1980s because the U.S. economy was not doing so well. Japan economy was booming. I thought I could go there for some opportunities. I studied in graduate school there, learned the Japanese language, and then coming out of that program, ended up getting hired by Toyota. So I think sometimes you make opportunities and you stumble on them. This is a combination of the two. I worked for 6 years in Japan with Toyota in their product planning group. I transferred back to the U.S. With Toyota then, and I worked at an organization called the Toyota Supplier Support Center, which was a group that Toyota set up in 1992 to help North American manufacturers implement their versions of the Toyota production system. So I got a chance to go in the field, work with many of them were Toyota suppliers, but also other companies. That Toyota kind of opened its doors to teach TPS to those organizations. I then, maybe most instrumental to this conversation, I transferred to our corporate strategy group and was instrumental in leading Toyota's corporate strategy in North America, obviously with the collaboration of many other people. But we used a methodology in Toyota called Hoshin Kanri that maybe we'll talk a little more about today. And then I left Toyota after one more assignment. I left Toyota in 2011. I came to the Lean Enterprise Institute, where I am now. I've been there 13 years. We're a nonprofit institute that's dedicated to helping organizations learn about the Toyota production system, or Lean. And I got a chance to work with a lot of organizations and try Hoshin Kanri outside of Toyota. And I realized I'm not going to be able to interact with everybody, and it's a really good, helpful methodology for organizations to learn. So I wrote a book about it called Managing on Purpose.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for that awesome intro. And that is something that I love your background, by the way. It's just so diverse and really unique, especially in the North American market, having that really deep insight into working in different countries, different methodologies. You've obviously have such a knowledge of the manufacturing side. And this is where I'm most curious to dive into today is people are familiar with the Toyota production system and Lean, I think in general across business, but tend to think it's very manufacturing focused. And so as far as leaders in the typical corporate office, when we talk about Hoshin Kanri and TP, or I guess Lean, how does it fit into that broader world? Like, how does Hoshin Kanri fit into the Lean thinking, and then how does it apply to leaders?
Yeah, great question. So, people tend to focus in my world too. I'm at the Lean Enterprise Institute, and we're to some extent kind of pioneer. The gentleman that founded us, Jim Womack, coined the term Lean. So he's the one who helped start this whole movement. And he wrote a book in 1989 that became pretty famous called The Machine That Changed the World. That was about what he learned in a research study he'd done across the automotive industry about Toyota and the Toyota production system. No one really knew about it until then. And so naturally, it's termed the Toyota production system. So people think that it's purely about production or about manufacturing. Of course, that's kind of the genesis of the thinking because it came out of Toyota, and Toyota continues to be a manufacturing company. But what was learned over the course of the last many years through work that we've done at the Lean Enterprise Institute and many others is that the applicability of this thinking is really goes across all industries and goes across within industries, goes across all functions. So, I mean, a great example is people tend to associate what Jim originally wrote in his book, The Machine to Change the World, with production. But in fact, a good portion of that book was about product development and what Toyota, some of the unique things they did around product development. So that's an area that people often forget about. But this thinking is applicable in any industry, and I think part of that is that it applies not only to like how you might process frontline work, even though that's extremely important, but what's the role of leadership, and how should leadership engage, and what should be the management system that kind of governs all that. And that's where, to your question, Hoshin Kanri and how that fits in. One of the things that Toyota learned in its genesis, Toyota was one of the pioneering companies. They weren't the originator, but they were one of the pioneering companies that started utilizing Hoshin Kanri back in the 60s. It came out of a movement from a gentleman by the name of Edward Deming, who's pretty famous in the management world, who went to Japan and helped kind of Japanese companies get back on their feet after World War II, and introduced this whole concept of Plan, Do, Check, Act. And Toyota brought that in to improve the quality. They knew they needed to improve quality, not just of their manufacturing processes, produce their vehicles, but also of their management processes. So Hoshin Kanri is really introduced for that purpose. And Toyota continues to use it, and other companies have seen it as beneficial in that respect too. So it defines, I mean, we can talk a little bit more in depth of what it is, but your question around how does it fit? I mean, I think it's in some sense kind of this umbrella. I often refer to it in an analogy of a human body. We need muscles and we need a skeleton. Hoshin Kanri, to some extent, is that skeleton, that system that holds the body together. Okay. The muscles are the problem solving and actually taking on those things that Hoshin Kanri has identified for us to focus on and actually solving those problems. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Okay.
And I guess I like how you use the muscle skeleton aspect. That speaks to my background in the health and fitness. And
I brought it up for a reason.
Perfect. Now, other people out there might not have that background, but it resonates with me. So now, how have you, well, we'll get to how it applies to lots of other industries, but what can you share a story or a moment from your time in the industry where you, I guess particularly at Toyota, that made you realize, wow, this is really powerful concept, and having seen it make that impact?
Well, I had the fortune, I kind of explained to you the kind of arc of my career with Toyota just now, and that when I had come to the Toyota Supplier Sports Center was 1994, and then I was there through about 2001, and starting in the late 90s and through the late 2000s, aughts, that decade is often called kind of oddly, but through that decade, like 1998 to 2008, Toyota went through an enormous amount of change. In fact, Toyota, I would say globally that was true. Toyota was becoming this Japanese company. They were moving from a Japanese company that kind of exported to the world to a global company that made products in the markets that they sold products in. And that was a huge transition for different regions of the world, but probably most impactful in that decade was the North American region. We transitioned from nearly tripled our sales and production in the course of that time. And you can imagine that tripling sales is not easy, I don't want to say. But tripling production means you got to build multi-billion-dollar assembly plants, which we did in North America to supply vehicles for the North American market. So Toyota really tripled its production footprint within North America during the course of that time. And that was hugely challenging because we had originally been we had started out before that decade as a company that had basically 3 assembly plants. They reported all back to Japan. By the end of the decade, we had like 12 plants, assembly plants, engine plants, parts component plants, and a regional headquarters in North America. So the whole dynamic had shifted. And we had as we started that out, when I came to corporate strategy, to your question, we're still kind of in very much a siloed mentality to some extent. Individual plants kind of reported back to Japan. And so we had to transition to a unified structure within North America. And that's where Hoshin Kanri really helped us because, part of my work in the very beginning of that time frame, like 2000, 2001, was pulling together all of the leadership of North America, defining a vision going into 2010, what do we want to be, and then clarifying on kind of what are the key initiatives, objectives we want to put forth to try to accomplish that vision over the course of the next many years. And that's kind of at a high level what Hoshin helped us do.
Awesome. So for the average leader that's listening to this, it's working in a corporate office, they're having trouble comprehending like tripling production in multi-billion-dollar plants all over the world. How do these principles apply to them in their day-to-day, whether they're in, say, tech or healthcare, education? On a day-to-day basis, how do leaders incorporate these principles?
So, I've had a chance to work in just about every industry, and particularly with the application of Hoshin Kanri, I worked in the construction industry. I was literally a half hour ago on a phone call with a leading institution in the healthcare industry and the hospitality industry. So it's applicable and up and down, I would say, size of companies. I've worked with multi-billion-dollar organizations. I've worked with a company that has 150 people. And so it's applicable in all those situations. And I would say that it's probably helpful for me to read its definition. And I think then maybe if your audience heard the definition, they'd kind of understand that, they could see and hear that it's applicable in many situations. Hoshin Kanri, as I would define it, as I learned in Toyota, is a management system for strategy that defines midterm and long-term direction. And that's both objectives and targets, and annually builds alignment vertically and horizontally to the direction, manages the annual execution to the direction, and develops the capability of people throughout the organization. I know that's a little bit of a mouthful, but what that is meant to explain is that what Hoshin Kanri does for you is take this. I think if most organizations I've been to, and I think it's probably your audience too, they've at some point in time developed a vision for the organization, or they've got some guiding principles wherever they are, and but most of what I've seen is that it's communicated through a website or maybe a slide deck that is shared through a town hall meeting, or at best it's maybe posted on the wall somewhere. No one has a methodology. Most organizations, I don't want to say no one. Many organizations don't have a methodology to take that and break it down to actionable things, let's say on an annual basis, that we're going to do to try to accomplish those things. So Hoshin Kanri is a process, a methodology to help you do that, to take what are the impacting forces, so to speak, those inputs that are coming into your organization. And those things could be things from the market, it could be your shareholders, it could be your internal employees or your customers. What are those things impacting your organization? How do you kind of digest those and define what the key or primary objectives are for the organization? And then how do you put in some detailed activities and plans to try to achieve those things, and ensure that you develop capability of people to help achieve them too. And I would just one more point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim. It's just too many organizations I go to have like 40 or 50 things that they need to get done. I think that's way too many. Organizations need to focus on I'd say 3 to 5. Like not more than that. That's what you want to, things that you want to, because this Hoshin Kanri is an opportunity to change the business, innovate the business, not just carry on the business.
I agreed. Yeah. And when you have too many priorities, nothing's a priority. One thing that stuck out in that is the development of the people, because
Yes.
I think that's what set, from my perspective anyway, where I see it setting apart from the typical goal setting, strategic planning that most companies do. And they go to this annual retreat and they map out all their goals and objectives and KPIs and blah, blah, blah. But often the people development aspect of it, the leadership side of it, is missing from that strategic plan. What can you say to that? Is that on track, or am I totally
Yeah,
off base?
absolutely. The other thing that's, I mentioned to you some things have seen in the field that I see missing, and that's like completely absent. Organizations don't see strategic planning as a methodology to develop capability. Particularly, in Toyota, it was particularly a way to develop capability of leaders, but other people in the organization too. And having worked in Toyota 23 years, and anyone who would listen to this who's worked in Toyota would agree, is that I think every day for the development and the things I learned while in Toyota. But Toyota is absolutely an organization that believes that we should be utilizing the most potential out of everyone we have and developing their capability. And it's the responsibility of I was an executive in Toyota. I worked up through the ranks while I was in Toyota, and it was always particularly as I became a manager, a leader in the organization, it's my responsibility to develop the people that work for me. That's a primary responsibility. You have to get the job done. That's part of your job too. But the other half is developing people. So it's natural that any mechanism they use, or any methodology they use, like Hoshin Kanri, an organization is going to focus on that too. So just that as context. Now, particularly around leaders, it's a great opportunity to develop capability of leaders, because if you think when we talk about those 3 to 5 things that we need the organization to get done, those are at corporate level. If you think about those as corporate level objectives, and I can use an example from my book. There's a case study in my book it's a generic company that makes lawnmowers. It's not based on a real company, but it's kind of an amalgamation of my experiences. Mm-hmm. But it's this company is struggling to develop an electric mower, and the market is moving more to electric, which is actually a reality in the lawnmower market. But the leaders, if you think about that, as an objective, that's not something that, for example, product development alone can accomplish. One function in the organization accomplish, one leader. You need production to be involved because they have to make the lawnmower. You need marketing and sales because there has to be a methodology to think about how to develop that, or how to market and sell that new mower to a customer base that didn't buy electric mowers from your company before. So putting leaders in the role of responsibility to lead an initiative like that means they have to work across the organization. And I call that, they have to lead by responsibility, not by authority. So you want to develop leaders, and I know you come a little bit out of the sports world. That's true too. A captain of a sports team doesn't become, obviously they have to have skill, but they have to have the ability to be able to work across the people in the organization, get respect from them and their teammates. So I think that, that's a critical, and Toyota looked at that very closely. And good organizations who do Hoshin Kanri look at that as one way to evaluate how leaders perform, is how well are they able to lead groups that maybe they don't have direct authority for.
Yeah, and leader does not necessarily mean having a leadership title.
No, it doesn't. And in fact, in the book, I purposely, I'm glad you brought that point. There's a scenario in the book where a plant manager who's not one of the top leaders of the organization has showed a lot of initiative and potential. So the CEO assigns she assigns this plant manager to take on one of the corporate level objectives. So she kind of asked him to step up a little bit. And that happened in Toyota too. The organization asked people like that. And when that person was asked to do that, he struggled a little bit. That's why and the CEO had to step in and coach him. But that's why it's important that not only those opportunities are provided, but that the leaders are there to coach team members when they struggle.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a key thing when I'm executive coaching or facilitating with the team. The leadership mindset in a lot of organizations is always looking at business strategy, and depending on where the person is in the organization, sometimes they're still doing individual contributor work while leading a team. And it gets lost that the number one goal of a leader, I would say, is to develop their team and generate results from the team, but in a way there are multiple ways to generate results, but sustainable results typically happen when you're developing the people in that team.
Absolutely. I mean, in my experience in Toyota, I mentioned to you, I did get promoted in the course of my career, but it was I think I was told a couple times explicitly, but it was definitely an implicit understanding that for me to be promoted, I needed to have prepared somebody to step into my shoes. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that was part of the succession. Succession planning was an integral part of how, of my ability to move in the organization and be promoted. And that had to be demonstrated through, it wasn't just, I think this person is the right person. They had to have demonstrated, developed capabilities to be able to step into a new role. And so it was a very explicit expectation, and very explicitly part of the management system in the organization that I would develop. And each leader had responsibility to develop the people that work for them.
So again, this is, from my perspective anyway, it's not rocket science that this is an important part of it, yet it's not as common as we would think. So where do you feel organizations, leaders, teams sort of go wrong or go astray?
That's a great question. I think part of it is, I've worked with a lot of organizations, and I think many of them I've met a lot of leaders that are very well-intentioned, meaning that they feel people are important, in the organization. They have a recognition that they want people to progress that work for them. I think often this may sound really simple, but I think often leaders are never really taught how to develop people. I think often leaders end up in roles because they've done a great job in the job they did before, and that's not a bad thing. You want, if the head of engineering, you want to be probably a pretty good engineer, because they got to make judgments about things related to engineering that can be very technical and practical. But I think they're often not intentionally developed to lead others. And that was a really powerful thing in Toyota. I kind of just said generically that you're expected to develop your people, but the other important point, Tim, related to that is you need practical management mechanisms. And it can't just be, hey, you should develop your people. As a general statement, in Toyota, Hoshin, I just explained to you how Hoshin Kanri was used. We had another mechanism that leadership used a lot. It was called A3 problem solving. A3 is kind of the size of a paper, but it's kind of a standard mechanism we use to problem solve all types of problems in the organization. And a role of a manager, whatever level you were at, whether you were a frontline manager, general manager, or vice president of the organization, you had a responsibility to create, but also more importantly, coach others on A3 problem solving. And the culture to it is like people were raising problems all the time, and there was an expectation that they would be coached. So my point is not to go into depth about what A3 problem solving is, but the point is that there is a defined mechanism for that to happen. So I think those two things are missing. Is often leaders aren't coached on how to coach effectively, and there's not a mechanism in place for them to help with that.
Absolutely. I go back to one of the other guests I had on the show. She called out a stat that was the average person becomes a manager or leader at 27, but doesn't get training and development until 42.
Oh,
And
probably true.
yeah, and then one of the things I see in my work is what type of training and development is that? So 1 hour webinar on, critical conversations or how to do one-on-ones can give some great information.
Right.
But what is the sustainment after that? The day-to-day interaction? How are leaders modeling that in the organization, and how is it being disseminated across the organization as a culture or a standard of excellence that is there? And I don't see that happening. It's one-off trainings here and there that once people leave that, the barrage of emails comes in and the information that they had in that session is lost.
I completely agree with that, Tim. I mean, Toyota's and what I teach is what we taught at LEI at the Lean Enterprise Institute. I mean, Toyota's the learning I got with 23 years in Toyota, 95% of it was on the job development. And maybe 5% was Toyota has a fair amount of classroom training and teach you how to do TPS, how to coach others, like how to interact with people skills. Those things are taught in the classroom, but primarily when I spoke earlier about the mechanisms, we use the on-the-job like solving a problem that's in the job and having a kind of a structured mechanism to coach and develop capability of people to do that. It's not it's not this separate thing that happens outside the work. It's part of the work. And so when you take that approach, actually, I think, like, from personal life experience, I've learned a lot more from the struggles, the mistakes, the challenges I've had in solving problems, whether they're personal or professional, than I have from sitting in a classroom. Now, I think there's value in sitting in a classroom and learning fundamental principles, but practical application has to be kind of learned on the job.
Yeah. The difference between education and learning. It's like,
yes.
Or knowledge gathering and implementation. You get the, students coming out of university with their brains packed full of facts and figures and knowledge. And how do you take that and implement it effectively on a day-to-day basis in the real world and rapidly changing environments? And that's where the real learning happens.
I agree.
Yeah. And so one topic that, in this day and age would be remiss if I didn't mention it is AI. And so as AI is taking over so much of what we do, how do you see these principles being applied in a rapid AI world?
Well, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, I've had a chance to interact recently a few times with one of my former Toyota colleagues, a guy by the name of Art Smalley, who's doing some really interesting work in how AI can be applied to lean thinking in practice and problem solving. There are a lot of things that we learn kind of intuitively, like how do you approach coaching a person, and that AI can be helpful for providing that feedback and information and immediate feedback to the coach on how that can help them. But it's honestly, I would say we're just kind of dipping our toe in the water right now where that can apply. My only trepidation, and I don't know, I'm a little bit further in my career arc than you are, and I have to say I've learned a huge so much. It goes back to what I just said 5 minutes ago. So much of like my ability to write this book or my ability to do the work that I do has been because I have struggled and honestly made a lot of mistakes and failed many times. And I think that's pretty important for people to experience in life. Uh, so I do worry that we don't want to take that away. People have to continue to like struggle, and I think because I think I found that the more there's no question, and that the more challenging experiences I've had stay with me a lot more than the things I'm able to accomplish easily.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk these days about the sloppy thinking, AI
Mm.
generating. You just like whether people used to say it about Google, like, well, you don't have to go actually do the work to find the research. You just Google it and it comes up. And with AI, it's doing a lot more stuff for you, so people aren't having to go through that thought process,
Mm.
the struggle, the trial and error. And I think we'll start to see impacts of that fairly soon. But I'm curious and I had a conversation with someone else about the flip side of that is AI is a tool,
Yeah.
and how we use that tool
Yeah.
impacts the outcome more. So if we use AI as our teacher, and we
Yes.
use AI to help follow a system and make us and stimulate us to think differently, then it could be a benefit.
Could be a huge benefit. I mean, one of the things, I mean, just a very practical thing that we're thinking about here in regards to AI and uh, in terms of the point you're making is there is in the world of lean, there is a fairly large body of knowledge. It's been accumulated over the course of um, like at LEI. We've been around for 27 years. The tomato production system has been known for like close to 40 years. So there is with our organization, others, there's like if you go to our website lean.org, there's just tons of like information available that people can research and understand. But it's kind of messy, to your point. Like if I want to learn about something specific and I want to delve into that topic, there's not good methodology now to just kind of like to do that. So I think where AI could really help is supporting all like kind of the organization and and ability to generate quick knowledge
Mm-hmm.
around different topics that a person may be interested in learning. And so I think I think there are a lot of really good opportunities to use it.
Well, actually, a previous guest on the show, her business is creating custom AIs for businesses that essentially amalgamate the common knowledge base of that business, the leaders within the
Mm.
organization. So it's searchable and use it for training and teaching and development. So the
Yes,
the
we're talking about the same thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's awesome. So going back to the human side of things a little bit here, you've worked in a lot of different industries and obviously seen a lot of throughout your career. What would you say is I guess the lesson about human behavior that often trips leaders and teams up, no matter what field they're in?
I think the most continues to be it's kind of an unending problem to solve. I think it continues to be uh, too many leaders, managers work and make too many decisions based on assumptions
Based on
without
what, sorry?
based on assumptions.
Oh, assumptions, yes.
Yeah, without really knowing the facts of like the situation. And I mean, we see this. I think this is an issue. I think honestly, this is an issue across the world. Uh, and but to your question, what I was kind of drilled into me. It took me I'm a slow learner, right? But in Toyota, what was drilled into me is I need to understand and make decisions based on what I've actually seen, and that means going and seeing the reality of the current situation, and also having kind of data to support what I whatever I decision I need to make. And I think in many situations, and I think it I'm not sure the reason. I don't believe it's a rigor that many leaders have necessarily learned. But particularly, and so as leaders, as you grow in the organization, there may be a time when you were an engineer or a production manager, and you knew a lot about like the issues that occurred in your production site or in your engineering shop. But as you've grown, you're asked to make a lot of bigger decisions and broader decisions, and you don't necessarily think about the ramifications of like what that's happening to the frontline work. You kind of have gotten disconnected from that. And so one of the things like I get to spend a lot of time with executives and leaders. One of the things I've forced them to do, because we did it in Toyota too. I mean, I asked them to solve a frontline problem. Like if not, so if you're so, I mean, let's use healthcare as an example. If there's a currently unexpectedly long wait time in the emergency room of the hospital, well, I'll ask a leader to understand, like go and learn and understand why that problem occurs through observation. You can't just, it's not just gathering data, because when you go and see things, you learn you know a lot more facts around.
That's a key part of of TPS, right? Is going to the source of the problem, get to the people that are dealing day to day with that, talk to them, observe them, and see it in action.
That's right.
Yeah.
You say so. Back to your original question, I still think that is opportunity. And many leaders kind of don't make decisions based on those facts. Toyota was really leaders were really good about that. Yeah, I mean they in their coaching, but as well as in their own actions. To your point, made an effort to go and see where the work is happening, and understand from that perspective what the problem is.
Mm-hmm. And that's I guess fairly straightforward from a production line manufacturing standpoint, industrial thing. What have you seen that look like in the corporate office environment?
Well, I mean, it's true anywhere. I mean, it doesn't, and I would say, we can refer to this as going to the Gemba, okay. But Gemba is wherever the work is happening. So one of the things that was revolutionary in the Toyota way of thinking, Toyota production system, is we flipped the pyramid on its head, meaning like the people that are providing the value are the people that are making the cars, and you serve them. My first 3 months in Toyota, I built cars, and I wasn't hired to do that job. I was hired in a planning group, but every team member that comes in Japan builds cars for 3 months, because they want you to know that that's hard work, but that's what the customer's paying for. And so in the course of your career, as you become a finance leader or you always know that like I serve that person. And so that philosophy has to be demonstrated. Like you don't just become a manager or vice president, just forget about that. In Toyota, you demonstrate that by going and seeing what the issues are. And that can happen. That's wherever the frontline work. If the frontline work is in human resources and hiring people, you should go and see how is that process working. If it's finance, if it's sales, how are sales? How is a dealer like handling sales if you're in the dealer network for Toyota? I mean that it is not limited to like an operational floor.
Yeah, and so leaders or some listeners listening to this and saying, this sounds like it'd be really helpful, really beneficial. They're like, yeah, our strategic plan, we did that, a couple quarters ago, and no one's ever looked at it again. Got a couple vague goals from it. Where would you say is the best place for a leader to start to say, okay, I really need to kick this into gear, what's the starting point?
Well, read my book.
Step one, done.
Well, yeah, I don't, I don't say that just because I want to sell books. I mean, I told you I had a career. I've had a career that kind of led to this book, and I've learned that that book it's a workbook, first of all, so it's meant to be pretty practical,
Okay.
with some exercises that leaders can do. But I would say that just in a general sense, uh, you know, you may not want to start with a whole company. Like start with a portion of the company to think about how to do this methodology, Hoshin Kanri, and sit down with the team and say, let's take a step back and think about let's think about 3 to 5 objectives we might want to do as an organization. I mentioned to you, I was just in a meeting with a healthcare organization where the leader of the organization has asked her team to step up, like take a step level up and think about, if you were thinking from my point of view as the leader, what do you think we should do? So ask the leaders to start to think that way and see what you come up with. I would force that you think about 3 to 5, and then you can start to define okay, how might we, what's the things we have to do to accomplish those things. And I would say one other point about that is don't think about targets too quickly, particularly just about financial targets. Too many organizations just think about that. Think about what you want to achieve. What's an objective you want to achieve? Not merely a target you want to accomplish or a target you set that you want to get to.
Okay. Would it be, so what analogy that popped into my head is when people say about decluttering or cleaning is don't say, I'm going to clean the house today. Be like, I'm going to clean the corner of my desk.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
And then I'll go to my entire desk, then maybe the office, and then this floor. And
well, the reason I say don't start with the whole company is just that this is a fairly high risk activity. If I was able to effectively communicate intention of Hoshin Kanri and what it's for, it's pretty culture changing in an organization. And so leaders are going to be going through this the same time their team members are, and sometimes that can be challenging. So I would say try it in a part of the business. I've worked with multi-billion-dollar companies. I say take a business unit and implement it with that business unit and see how it goes. And then you can spread it to the whole corporation.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And especially how you said it's culture changing, because I repeatedly talk to leaders and teams about what we're doing is not just trying to check a task off the list. We're, especially from leadership behaviors, I believe strongly that that's what creates culture. What the things that leaders do every day, the behaviors they reinforce, the ones they model, are what become culture in the organization.
Absolutely.
And whether they think they're doing it or not, they're building culture on a day-to-day basis, and that can be tough to change unless there's really a strong mindset, a strong vision for what change has to happen, and the commitment to stick to those behaviors that are going to create the change over time.
Yeah, well, you do this work with executives, and I do believe that a coach is helpful. I mean, an external coach. I was having a conversation this morning with a gentleman who was a executive leader in Toyota around the same time I was. He had originally came. He was in Europe. He's in Europe, but he originally had come from General Motors, where and entered Toyota as kind of at a pretty high level, and it was a big challenge for him to the cultural change.
Yeah.
But in that case, I mean, Toyota's not going to change their whole culture for one person. I mean, so he's going to have to adapt to that culture or find another place to work. But in many situations, it's leaders want to change, but they don't, they're in the current state of the culture of the organization they're in. And so they might want to change personally, But I think having someone to help them do that is helpful because you're not in like Toyota where you're just surrounded by the culture and people that know the culture already. I think a coach is helpful.
Oh yeah, I obviously biased in that in that sense. And,
Well, me too. I think we're both in that situation.
yeah, in the perfect world, everyone has a coach,
Yeah.
and
Tiger Woods has coach.
yeah, all the high.
LeBron James has a coach.
Yeah, and when leaders can start to shift their mindset and put on that coach hat to work
Right.
to coach their team, then it becomes scalable.
That's right.
And that's what I hear a lot about is like, oh, executive coaching is so expensive and it's it's not scalable, and it is when you can start coaching one person and then they coach someone else or a couple other people and they coach a couple other people. That's scalable across the organization, but it starts with intention and this purpose. You 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 talk about connecting corporate objectives to the daily work and getting close to the work. Uh, where have you seen, I guess, the impact of that on frontline workers? And I'm sure you saw this lots at Toyota, but where those frontline workers could start to really see the impact of their work on the big picture and how leaders communicated that.
Well, I've seen that I mean, that's a primary part of the work that I do. I mean, I've seen that in healthcare organizations. I've seen that in construction companies, other organizations. But it, like again, what is and of course I saw it in Toyota. I was just at Toyota like a few weeks ago, and I saw it again. It's very. I mean, we went to assembly line in Georgetown, Kentucky, where Toyota's plant, to one group leader on the line, and he was able to effectively explain what the company objectives were and how those cascaded and like connected to what very specific process improvements he was doing in his area of the production line. And I think so that's what Hoshin Kanri is all about.
Perfect.
I mean, if we're going to conclude the conversation, or however we're going to conclude this today, to me, it's about having a good management system that defines those objectives at the top, gets alignment to them, and then has a way to break those down to the levels in the organization to do that. And my book explains that in very practical detail. I mean, that you can develop a corporate level Hoshin. You also, based on that, develop a departmental level Hoshin that kind of connects to that, so that people further down the organization understand their roles and responsibilities. And honestly, when people, big surprise maybe, but when people actually know that the work that they do contributes to the higher level objectives of the organization, and concretely they know that, like what I'm doing, how this helps, it's pretty motivating for people.
Yeah.
Big surprise. But organizations often don't have mechanisms to do that.
Yeah. One of the reasons I got into the executive coaching and the leadership was from the well-being side, and
Yes.
seeing that helping people manage their, not just their health but their happiness, how much they're thriving in the organization. And when you can obviously see that the work you do makes a positive impact and you feel like you're contributing in a meaningful way and your leaders coaching you and you're developing and growing, life gets pretty good at that point.
Big surprise, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I love how you said earlier that, yes, you wrote a book, but it's a workbook. It's a practical implementation guide. Um, what, obviously, step one, start at the beginning, but what would you say to someone who says, "Oh, that sounds awesome, but my organization would never go for it"? Where do you start?
Well, like I said, you can do a part of the organization. I mean, so if whatever part of the organization you do for this particular methodology, you're going to need to have the buy-in of the person at the top. Now, if you're not going to do the whole organization, that might not be the CEO, but it's got to be. Let's say you're going to try this methodology in a plant. it's got to be the plant manager has to have bought in, or you're like in a healthcare system in one hospital. I mean, that can be, you can get good benefit from that. But this is a leadership system. So if I don't know the type of person you're describing, but let's just say, and typically I often hear from sometimes continuous improvement groups that, I can't get the buy-in of the leader. And I mean, this requires that buy-in now. So, I mean,
is it possible to do with one leader, like one leader and just their team?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe I wasn't so clear. I mean, I think you could take one function in the organization with a leader. You could take one plant, and you can try it there. And I've done that in organizations, and it generates benefits fairly quickly in an organization, because all of a sudden, to your point, to our discussion earlier, people know what they're supposed to do, and they're contributing to a few critical things that the organization needs to accomplish. And I'll give you an example of to make my point. I worked with I brought up the topic of construction multiple times. I worked with the largest construction company in the U.S., Turner Construction. They're actually a case study in my book. We work primarily in their New York business unit. Now, Turner's a big company, and their New York business unit's pretty big, probably $8 billion revenue, but it wasn't the whole organization. They're like a $25-30 billion company. So, but within that business unit, safety was a critical issue for them. I mean, safety in general in construction is a challenge, but in their business unit was lagging like the company. And their senior vice president determined that safety was going to be people should be able to go home the same condition they came and not get hurt. And so he made that a priority for the organization. He put in problem solving and various mechanisms, built some specific activities off the Hoshin he developed. And within the course of like a few years, they're the best in the company. They're beating the industry because people like leadership got focused. The organization understood the priority, and it generated results for the company.
Great. Yeah. And when you put those things in place, we know it works.
That's right.
Yeah. So when you look, if we put on the crystal ball, I guess we'll say, what do you see? What most excites you about the next 5 to 10 years of change in leadership and strategy in an organization?
Well, I think one thing that does excite me. I have 2 children. They're 35 and 29, and I think the generation below me is much more expecting that we work better together. I mean, so I don't know if that was always. I came from a fairly competitive generation, and sometimes we work well together, sometimes we didn't. I would say that the next generation really looks at, and some of the key concepts of my book about alignment and collaboration, I think they feel is really critical. So I have a lot of hope for future generations being able to carry forth that kind of thinking, which I think will helps society, helps I think organizations function better too.
I agree, and I would support you in that. All right, one last question is to wrap up. Best leadership advice you ever received?
Oh, best leadership advice I ever received was probably, I kind of alluded to this a little bit, but there was a point where I was really struggling in my role. When I was in Toyota, I was a manager level. I wanted to grow and become an executive in the organization. And my manager at the time told me, Mark, you need to think 2 levels above where you are. In everything you do, think about the perspective of someone who's a vice president in the organization, and how will they think? And that it sounds like a small thing, but it changed my whole perspective on like how I think about problems. It's not just about like my problem. It forced you to think about like, hey, what's the higher level problem, or what's the company's problem? And surprisingly, a lot of, I think, leaders can kind of get stuck in the role they're in, and that was freeing for me to be able to think that way.
Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's been awesome to have you on the show, and I appreciate you sending me a copy of your book to read through. And I know people and leaders and teams out there will get extreme value from the workbook.
Thank
And
you.
I will make sure to post all the links to it in the show notes. And where can people find you?
I'm a part of I mentioned earlier, the Lean Enterprise Institute. Go to lean.org,
Okay.
lean.org. That's our website. You can find me on that website. You can connect to me through that website. It's great to go there just to see the volume of resources that are potentially available for this topic too.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to reconnecting again soon, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Tim.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timborys.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Borys with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.